Welcome back to the Indiewood Podcast, a podcast about indie filmmaking and the many hats filmmakers wear in order to get those films made. My name is Yaroslav Altunin. I'm a writer, director. I think that's it. I used to do a lot more, but I've now just comfortably settled in the realm of writer and director. And this month we are doing a writing-only series with the talented multi-hyphenate Julia Batavia.
Hello.
Who's a screenwriter, a novelist, a podcaster writer. I guess that's right?
I've written a podcast.
Yeah.
Narrative podcast.
Yeah. So welcome back.
Hey, nice to be here.
It's good to have you.
Thank you.
Welcome back.
Such a joy.
So last episode we talked about your career and how you were the engine that kind of propelled everything that you've done so far in your career. And you've been hired to write screenplays, you've been hired to work with directors, you've been hired to write a podcast, and then you've done things on your own. Mm-hmm. And I feel like, when I talked about your trajectory in the previous episode, it was inspiring because you did it on your own. You pushed everything forward. You didn't just write a screenplay, send it out to people and be like, okay, get me work. You were like, I'm going to get this on my own. And you did. And then coming out of grad school, while you were getting these other projects, you did other things. And I think that was also inspiring because you weren't just comfortable being in the bubble of a writer. You were like, I need to know what it's like to direct a film. And then you were like, I'm going to write a book. This story wants to be a book. And you did that. And then someone was like, hey, do you want to write a podcast? And you were like, I have no idea. Sure.
Right.
And you did. And the cool thing about it is because you're a biopic writer. At least that's what you were back then. And then someone's like, hey, this is a podcast about sci-fi. And you're like, yes, let's do it. And you did it. It was so cool.
Thanks.
So let's talk about Neptune, which is a short film that you wrote and directed.
Yeah.
And then I shot. So maybe I am a cinematographer after all.
You are a cinematographer.
Yeah. I mean, I've done cinematography. I'm not a cinematographer. Indiana's a cinematographer. I just point a camera at stuff and press record.
All right. Okay.
Yeah.
I was so fed up with having things in development and not seeing actually words I'd written spoken by actors on a screen. I was like, screw it. I'm going to do a short film. So the idea came from a article that I had read like 10 years earlier. Again, this is why everything just sort of...
Everything matters.
Everything is in its own time. And it was about, actually, it was an interview with Robert Pattinson.
That's what it was, yeah.
At the height of Twilight fame. And I remember it was in Vanity Fair. And I remember reading it and he sounded so sad. He was just stuck in his hotel room eating M&Ms, playing the guitar. And I was like, man, this guy's life has been really impacted by fame in a negative way. And how awful. So I love the idea of filming things in one space. The Anniversary Party is probably my favorite film in terms of, if I ever wanted to shoot a feature, it's doable. Just have it be in a house. You don't have to leave the location. Yeah. So the short film was based in one hotel room, and it was about a celebrity being interviewed by a journalist played by your wife, Sarah.
My then girlfriend.
Pre-fiance, now wife. And a stalker breaks into the hotel room posed as a room service attendant and holds him hostage at gunpoint. And I think what was interesting to me is we're in a soundproof hotel room. There's this crazy guy with a gun. There's this triangulation. What do? You have the journalist looking at it. You have the actor experiencing it. And then you have the mentally unstable person sort of guiding the action.
How did that experience, writing a short film, directing it, and then seeing it, how did that change your writing?
Well, I learned I do not want to direct ever again, which is a good thing to learn. I think it's important to try different roles to realize what you like and don't like. And I do think there's this huge emphasis on being a writer-director, and like that is the pinnacle. But I found that I cared so much more about the words on the page, what was being said. I didn't really care where the camera went. I remember I asked you, where do you think it should go? And you're like, you're the director, you tell me. And I was like, no, but you're the cinematographer, you tell me. And so it was like, directors, which I completely respect, they have to have this authority. They have to have this vision of this is the way we're going to do it, which I just don't inherently care enough. Maybe I will if I see another project get made, and then I'll say, no, I put it over there. Don't do that. But at the time, my main goal was just hearing things I'd written spoken aloud.
That's so important. I feel like if you're always in a vacuum, you don't get the necessary perspective of what your work sounds like performed by other people.
And sure, were there less expensive ways to do that? Like I could have mounted a play. Like I could have.
Less expensive?
I mean, but I've always been go big or go home.
Yeah.
So that is, I chose a short film, and I don't regret having done it. No. It was a very worthwhile experience.
I have seen the film again. I want to say recently, but because I was also the editor,
right?
And I remember seeing it pop up on my computer about a year ago, maybe 2 now. But this was when we did this. This was 2019.
Yeah.
And so I saw it maybe again in 2023, and it's good.
Aww.
It's good. I feel like when you detach yourself from something, and this has happened with work that I've written and photos I've taken and things I've shot and edited. Years later, I'll look back and I'm like, damn. And I think it's some
like, wait, damn in a good way or a bad way?
Damn in a good way.
Okay.
I feel like there's a sense of weird creative, and I want to call it body dysmorphia.
Yeah.
Because that's something I've experienced. And so that's a unique parallel for me, at least. Like, creatively, I look at something that I've just made, I'm like, that's not good enough. Ugh, that sucks.
Yeah.
Ugh, it looks bad. Then I look at it years later, detached from my connection to it. Like my spiritual connection to it, and I look at it, I'm like, wow, that looks cool.
Look,
that looks pretty.
At the end of the day, we have to celebrate the effort.
Yeah.
Like we have to celebrate that you did the thing. No matter the outcome, you created something out of nothing, you put yourself out there, and now this entity has its own energy. And what comes of it, we don't know yet. Right? Like it could be a delayed response, or it could be an imminent reaction. But you created something. And I think I'm trying to be kinder to myself because I was so outcome oriented. And that whole releasing attachment to outcome, very zen, very cutesy, very demure, very mindful.
We're not very mindful. It was, you were very focused on not mindful things.
No, it's like if it doesn't win awards, then it was worthless.
Yeah. And that's not a good.
No, it's not a good, it's
Yeah.
not a good mindset to be in. And I'm still guilty of falling into that trap sometimes of if a tree falls in the forest and no one is around to see it, does it make a sound? The tree still fell in the forest.
You still wrote the script. You still have the material.
And maybe someone will come upon the tree and be like, hey, that tree fell.
And that's actually an interesting segue into another project that you did that you wrote a long time ago that fell and that someone heard and found. But we'll get to that, I think, a little later. That's a conversation for a full episode, I think.
Sure.
After Neptune, the short film, there was a story that came about. It was a very personal story. We don't have to talk about the meat and potatoes.
We'll be vague.
Yeah. But this event happened in your life, and you were like, I want to write this. But you didn't write a screenplay, even though I feel like you could have.
Yeah.
You know, it was very much in line with the other biopics you've written, but the biopic was about you.
Yeah. That was the scariest.
Yeah. But then you didn't write a movie about that, which was entirely like in your lane, your forte.
Yeah.
You wrote a book.
I did write a book. I wrote a novel in about a year.
Why a book?
Well, coming from the literary world, and then compare that to everything it takes to make a movie, I was like, I only need one editor to like this and then one publisher to say yes. It felt at the time like the bar for entry was a modicum lower than...
Was it? Thinking back on it?
I still think it's more optimistic in a way, but maybe that's just my skewed perception. I mean, I'll be honest. I went through a breakup and it was devastating. And I wrote nonsense for months until finally I needed the compulsion to be exorcised. And the fastest way to do that was a book. And I'd actually started taking, okay, here's the context. In 2019, after the breakup, I took a novel writing class at UCLA, Novel 1.
And this was UCLA Extension.
UCLA Extension, which, by the way, I have 2 friends from that who I'm still in contact with, and we are a little writers group, and we'll meet up, share our ideas. They've read screenplays of mine, but mostly we share fiction. But I wanted to branch out into a different discipline just to like get some space. And so I started writing a fictionalized version of that in the class.
Of your breakup.
Of the breakup.
Yeah. I like what you just said there. Getting out of your creative bubble and kind of trying a different discipline.
Yeah.
And the last, God, it's been, I don't know, maybe a month or two, maybe a bit more. I've just had fantasies about writing a book. And it's not that I don't love screenplays or that I feel like, oh, if I write a screenplay, it'll never get made or whatever. Like, I still have stories that I want to write as screenplays, regardless of, you know, whatever happens to them. But I really want to write a book. There's something about that shift in discipline where it's all about prose and all about thought. There's so many times when I was writing a screenplay and I was like, he thinks this. And I was like, I can't write that. And it's a movie, you know, but in a book, I can take a chapter and just be like, I'm going to write 20 pages about this guy's singular thought.
I will say this, though. Coming from the discipline of screenwriting, which is so entrenched in structure, and you have to understand structure on a basic level to write a very A plus B equals C kind of story. Until you are competent with that, you can't riff like a jazz musician.
No, you can't.
And novel writing it's deceiving in that you think you can just go, but it's hard.
You can't. God, I'm really glad you said that. Okay, so I'm going to sidebar for a little bit because I watched this video, and it's this guy I follow on YouTube, and he's a great musician. I forget his name. I'm so sorry. And he did a video watching. Oh my God! See, I once I start forgetting names, I forget all.
Doesn't
the names.
matter. Continue.
It's the guy from Jurassic Park. Life Finds a Way.
Oh, Richard. No, Attenborough?
No.
That's not Richard Attenborough.
No, he doesn't say Life Finds a Way. Does he say that?
Sam Neill?
No, that's the other. Jeff Goldblum, thank you.
Oh, I can't believe we didn't rep Jeff Goldblum.
And I should have remembered.
I love you, Jeff. Sorry.
Right. I should have remembered because I watched a video about Jeff Goldblum playing jazz.
Oh.
And so this musician, very talented jazz musician, is watching Jeff Goldblum play. Jeff Goldblum play jazz with his band. Because he does that. He'll like pop up in a club in Los Angeles and play jazz.
Yeah.
And just be pure Jeff Goldblum.
Right.
You know, like his mannerisms and his, his I don't want to call him tics, but his just way of being.
He's a national treasure.
He should be, if not. And so he plays jazz. And he is, I don't know how to describe it because I'm not a jazz musician, but I understand music a little bit because I did it a long time ago. He is good, but I feel like can truly only be appreciated by other jazz musicians.
Sure.
Because there's some jazz that you listen to, you're like, what is that?
Right.
And a jazz musician is like, oh man, I get it. Like I get that weird, like seventh sustain to, you know, whatever, like dissonance. And so the musician said something interesting. He was like, Jeff Goldblum understands the technical of it, but he doesn't necessarily have the experience.
Sure.
Right? But because he understands the technical side of jazz, he can play what he's listening to.
Sure.
Because there's two types of jazz where you have the technical knowledge and experience, and your hands just go up and down the scales, and they can play riffs, and it's nice and free and sexy. But then there's what you're listening to, which is a lot harder to play.
Yeah.
And so coming back to novel writing and
Sure.
screenwriting, you know, I feel like if you don't understand the technical of it, you can't play that really complex jazz.
If you don't have a comfortability with the foundations of story structure, it's extremely daunting to go write 50,000 words.
Yeah, and keep it coherent.
So the book I wrote is very structured in that each chapter is an hour of the day. And so the book takes place in 24 hours. I mean, that was a way that I could wrap my head around getting it to the finish line. But within those chapters, those hours, that's the jazz. That's where you just go off and riff. And that's not to say in screenplays you can't riff either. But it all stems from I would, say a classical story structure. Anyway, I wrote the book. I happened to still be in contact with like one or two people from the Penguin world. I asked who they recommended would be a good editor. New York Book Editors is a company that has freelance editors, and you submit what your story's about and what you're looking for, and they pair you with someone. She recommended this individual woman, Jennifer Cardilla. I will stan Jen because she was amazing. And so I ended up working with Jen on editing the book. And then Jen was able to connect me, help me write a query letter to a handful of agents that she thought would be interested in the book. And from the 10 agents, 2 responded, which is very lucky. I understand that actually was like probably the exception to the rule.
But also a testament to your craft.
Well, the next part of the story is we sent out the book at maybe the wrong time because it was November 20. We didn't do it in November of 2020, but we did it around that time. And it just wasn't a story that was particularly relevant, I would say. So the book itself got a lot of rave rejections. I'll put it that way.
Okay.
Fine. It's a first novel. I did it. I came out of this with like a book agent that I've sent short stories to, and she submitted those places. So it's the win here for me is not the published book. It's the connection to future possibilities.
And also I feel like it's the act of creation as well. You created something massive because 50,000 words is no joke.
Yeah. And again, it stemmed from passion, compulsion. I had to figure out a way to make sense of what had happened.
And a lot of work that I think we do as writers is therapeutic in a way. I mean, I've said this on the pod before where a lot of my stuff is just me unpacking my life and upbringing.
I mean, I cringe a bit thinking how I made friends read that book. Thinking about like, God, that was an open wound that I was like, what do you think? And they're still my friends, so that's great.
That means something about the friendship, right?
More about the friendship than the book, probably.
Well, since then you've written short stories, which I think are also really fun because they can bring forth other versions of that story. Like you can write a short story that can then become a short film. It can become a feature. I think it's a really cool avenue for exploring different stories in short form, I guess.
I think the thread throughout is how do you do the most with the least?
How do you be efficient? Yeah.
How do you use every word, every action to the most it can deliver? I think that is a great exercise, writing short prose that then can translate into other things, because a lot of times, you know, in screenplays, you start too early, you end too late, no one, or you're There's no subtext. I mean, that we'll get into that at another point. But I think that anytime you can do more with less, you've done something good.
Speaking of more with less, but I say that sarcastically, I want to talk about the podcast.
Sure.
Because this is a story that was based on a film released on a big streamer.
Right.
And they wanted to do an origin story for one of the characters.
Right. And disclaimer, this may never see the light of day.
Yeah.
I don't think it will.
It's still in the works. It's still being
I don't think
on.
I think it's gone, but that's fine.
So working on the podcast, because it was a narrative podcast, but it was audio form and was still screenplay-esque, I guess, in a way.
I would call it a radio drama.
Okay. But it's still based on a film, so there was still some structure in it.
Yeah.
How did that, that writing process change you as a writer?
First, I started working on it with a creative collaborator, this writer, Peter. We had both been hired by Q Code, who had been partnered with Paramount, because the movie was a Paramount film. They went to Q Code, who makes narrative podcasts, and we're like, we want to do an origin story. So my management at the time had put me up for the job. I interviewed, I got it, started working with Peter. So we took the characters from the movie and created like a whole kind of world. And we had 6 episodes at the time, half hour each. And it did stretch my capacity because I am terrible at world building. I am terrible at sci-fi. It's just not something that I...
You've written about damaged creative men for 10 years.
Meanwhile, the character is a damaged creative man. And that's why I probably got the job.
Probably, yeah.
The main character was this dude who just couldn't get his shit together. But anyway... and that's what was fun writing with Peter, who was more about
the world building,
the context, what are we looking at, what space are we occupying,
the pew pew, the
pew pew,
warble,
right? But also, when you're writing a podcast, you're not writing visual; you're writing for sound. So it's about figuring out, what are we hearing?
Is it like writing a stage play, but for
not
people?
even, because like you don't.
Well, hold on, let me finish the thought. Is it like writing a stage play, but for people who can't see? Because plays are all about audio, because you don't really do much in the physical space. Like, yeah, you move around, there's props, there's sets, but it's still about the spoken word. That's why plays, for the most part, are just dialogue.
Right. It's different, though, because you're writing in action in the form of sound. So you have to write in footsteps. You have to write in the clink of a teacup, the pouring of the water, the shut of a door. There's wind chimes outside. Like you're creating a space.
Literally
in sound.
For the blind, yeah.
Yes. That was a huge shift, nothing I'd ever done before. And it did make me more conscious of transitions and how important sound is in a screenplay.
From a craft standpoint, after writing that podcast, are you adding those audible little blurbs into screenplays now? Or has your formatting or writing changed because you've had this experience writing quite extensively for that podcast? Because we'll talk about that in a bit.
I think that I have been more informed and more conscious of audio, that's not a word.
Yeah.
Audio cues and how they affect character and how they affect tone and the mood of the story. Because, I mean, it's sort of like stereotypical, your character's going through a dark time, there's thunder outside. You know what I mean? How does it affect what's happening? Yeah. Your character's happy, birds are chirping. But, of course, you can be more creative than that.
I like that. Because it could be like the crack of thunder instead of, there's thunder outside.
They have an idea. The microwave goes off. Eureka.
Yeah, I like that. And I wanted to mention a little bit about how much you wrote for that podcast. Yeah. I feel like when we start a new thing or we want to elevate our craft, it's like, oh, well, I'll write a screenplay. It's not about writing one screenplay to become a better writer. You have to write 10.
You have to. I don't know if the Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours has been debunked.
It has been, but the concept still stands. The more you do
I think
something,
it's like 40,000 hours.
Yeah, it's more than that.
To be honest.
But with the podcast, because eventually Peter left that project and it was just you.
Yeah.
And so you wrote.
Yeah.
all of it.
The podcast was over a couple years on and off with big chunks in between of like, we'll wait to hear back from them, like 8 months here and there. And by that point, Peter and I had written 6 episodes of like 30 pages each. That was there for a while. And then Paramount, that was the studio. Paramount came back and said, well, we want our episodes and 8 of them. And Peter was like, he had other things to do.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't have anything else to do.
Give me.
And it was like an insane deadline. I remember this was like February of 2022. I ended up writing roughly 48 pages per week for 8 weeks based on the writing we had done previously. Yeah. So some of it was already there, but a lot of it was changing. And I was like, oh, this is like a writer writing like an entire season of television.
Yeah.
And
multiple screenplays.
It was hard, but it's also, it was a good discipline practice. You had to get it. I had to get it done. There was a deadline. There was someone waiting to read it. So, was it my best work? No, absolutely not.
It was good training, if anything else.
Yes. I think you need absolutely more time to write something. That's just my personal experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thinking back on all the things you've done, apart from being a writer, because you were like, oh, I'm coming out of grad school. I'm a screenwriter. I'm trained. I went to film school at NYU. Like, I got the experience. And then you're like, wait a minute. What's this directing thing? What's this novel thing? What's this podcast thing that became like you going to the gym every day, training for a marathon?
It's true.
And I think, if anything, people listening to this episode can get from our conversation is there is so much more to learn about your creative process and other disciplines. And I think even if you don't have a career in that other discipline, dip your toe into it, because I feel like it will.
It's not going to dilute your talent.
Yeah.
It's not going to make you any less of a screenwriter.
It's going to make you better.
If you write a novel, it's like all of a sudden somehow you're not like some pure auteur. That's bullshit. Like, try. Yeah. I dare you to write a novel. It's hard.
I've been thinking about it for months, and I think soon, maybe I'll do it for November.
Yeah, the novel writing month.
Yeah. Although they got in trouble with AI, so did
they?
Yeah, they were like, you could use AI to write a book, and everyone's like, what?
Oh God.
Okay, maybe I'm wrong. I don't want to.
The South Park Chat GPT episode is truly the most epic when it comes to like the AI.
Oh, you mean the one that AI generated?
Yeah.
Yeah. That was a scary one to watch. Although
scary, but
I have a lot of thoughts on AI. Maybe we'll do another episode on AI, because we did that as a special. We'll kind of bring back.
Not with me. I don't have a lot of I don't have a lot of knowledge.
Yeah. Well, you do have a lot of knowledge on craft, on screenwriting.
Not on AI though.
Not on AI. But I want to talk to you about screenwriting craft, and we'll save that for the next episode next week.
Great.
Yeah. So Julia, thank you for coming on. Thank you for everybody listening, and we'll see you next week.
See ya.
Bye-bye. Thank you for joining us at the CFA studio for another series of the Anywood Podcast. You can find the podcast wherever you find your podcasts, or on YouTube at the Cinematography for Actors YouTube channel. See you next week.
From the CFA network, Cinematography for Actors is bridging the gap through education and community building. Find out about us and listen to our other podcast at cinematographyforactors.com. Cinematography for Actors Institute is a 501c3 nonprofit. For more information on fiscal sponsorship, donations, because we're tax exempt now, so it's a tax write-off, and upcoming education, you can email us at contact@cinematographyforactors.com. Thanks.